Welcome to week 4. 3 chapters in our primary text, starting with chapter 7, a little bit more on research. And your author notes that research is listening and fact-finding. And I like that because sometimes I think we complicate research. We try to make it more intricate than it needs to be or more confusing than it needs to be. Essentially, you're just fact-finding. And so use that research to your benefit, not just for this class, but obviously for your other projects in life where you'll have to do research. Use it, enjoy it. It can be a lot of fun. Your author also notes that digital communication is changing the landscape, and that's very true. There is so much data available from a website, social media, online surveys, just a plethora of information. Not all of it good, but it can make it easier to get research, but it can also make it easier to get or conduct bad research. So just be careful. And there are some principles that we're going to go over this week that will help you get good quality research. When you do your own research, or if you hire someone else to do your research within your organization, make sure you pay particular attention to how the research is conducted. It's pretty easy to create a research project that looks formal or even scientific, when in fact it may come from an untrustworthy source, or it has untrustworthy results because the project managers used leading questions, maybe purposely selected the candidates, or even skewed the sample. So be careful with that if you're using another company, or if you were doing the research yourself, just be mindful of that. Your author recommends that practitioners keep in regular contact with their peers, friends in related fields, and others who typically possess a wealth of useful experience and knowledge. And I think this is a good opportunity to remind you that you should be in contact with others in your field. I'm assuming that most of you are in some communication-related field or aspire to be in a communication-related field, and there are many organizations. The Public Relations Society of America is one that I belong to, and there are others as well. But if you're not already involved with one of those organizations, or at least proactively reaching out to other peers and people in your related field, I encourage you to do that. You can learn from them, get some best practices, and also have some support when you need it. All right, another note that is in Chapter 7 is what your author refers to as advertising cost equivalency. Now, some of you who have been in public relations a while may know the term as ad value equivalency. You may also know that the Barcelona principles prohibit the use of ad value equivalency. And I won't go into the history, but just know that many public relations professionals do not advise using ad value equivalencies. I'll just tell you my own personal feelings. I kind of have mixed feelings. Certainly understand the principle behind it, but I also know, having come from an advertising background, I worked in an advertising agency for a while. It was very helpful to go to the admiral at the time. We worked for the Navy, and lay out what the ad value equivalency was of the public relations that I provided. And so the idea is that, if I got 2 column inches in the New York Times, that would sell for X number of dollars. And so we would say, if this were an advertisement, it would cost you, $75,000. We were able to get that with earned media, meaning an article or a photo or something like that. And so it was valued at $75,000 of ad value equivalency. It made it very easy. Dollars to dollars. Most leaders and most organizations understand dollars because they have to manage a budget. So it did make it pretty easy, although there were some downsides to it as well. And the bottom line from the Public Relations Society of America and other public relations organizations is that it's nearly impossible to compare advertising and publicity placements in terms of their relative value. Okay, Chapter 10. The chapter focuses on some of the key advantages and disadvantages of each survey method. I'm not going to go over all of those for brevity's sake, but I encourage you to read those, and especially pay attention to those research methods you may want to use, and give a good assessment. Take the author's advice in terms of the advantages and disadvantages, keeping in mind that there's no single best method of survey research. The best method or methods, if you're going to use multiple methods, basically depends on the project specific factors, keeping in mind your goals and objectives. All right, the final chapter that we'll read this week from our text is chapter 12, and I'm just going to give you this advice up front. Don't spend too much time reviewing the details of the chapter. If you are doing primary research using quantitative methods, then by all means jump in head first and enjoy yourself. There's a lot of good information in there. Otherwise, just kind of read the introduction, skim over some of the details that he provides, and there's a lot of details, and then try to glean out some of those overall tips. I'll share some of those with you in my weekly discussion response as well. All right, our first reading is from Lindemann, Public Relations Research for Planning and Evaluation. The paper outlines the various tools and techniques that public relations practitioners should consider when designing and carrying out research projects. Some good information in there. The author did a nice job of kind of laying those out, and so I encourage you to read those. The author also mentions that research is the key to any successful public relations campaign. And that should sound familiar. I think I've said it every week. That research is very important. It's true whether you work for a profit, nonprofit, government, doesn't matter. Research is going to be key. Your author also notes that for truly effective public relations research, advanced planning is necessary. I've made this mistake myself where you get sidetracked on the research and you don't stay true to what your objectives are. And so you can spend a whole lot of time heading down a trail that doesn't lead to where you need it to. So just be mindful of that, and advanced planning will help with that. And then finally from that reading, there are 4 major components of the process that need to be taken into consideration for research, and those are found on page 13 of that paper. So I encourage you to read those, some good advice. All right, our final reading for the week is Willis, the International Handbook of Market Research Techniques, where we learn about in-depth interviews. I love in-depth interviews. I use them in a lot of research. Keeping in mind that the objective is to understand the nature and the makeup of the area being researched, not necessarily to measure the size and shape of it. So you're not pulling out quantitative data. You're trying to dig deep into a specific subject. And these in-depth interviews will help with that. It's one of the reasons I like them for some of the research that I've done in the past. Keeping in mind that the key for those in-depth research, or in-depth interviews rather, is to be flexible. You never know going into that interview what responses will be provided. And as the researcher, you need to be flexible enough to kind of go with the flow, keeping in mind your objective. You don't want to get too far off topic. But also you want to be open to changes in your research that might be necessary. And then your authors rightly note that when you analyze that qualitative data, there's no right way to analyze it, right? Whatever supports your method, or rather supports your objective using whatever method you did. Now, keeping in mind that although there's no right way to do it, there are some best practices for data interpretation that still apply, keeping in mind the overall objectives of your research. Okay, so those are the notes for this week. As I remind you every week, stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and most importantly, enjoy this time of learning.